My name doesn't matter much, but you can call me Bram. Everybody at the port called me Bram or Bram from intake. Or, when I was being a pain, words I won't repeat here. I worked at a place called Halden Reach. You won't find it on the nice maps. It sat out past the salt flats where the land goes flat and white and quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your back teeth. Used to be a cargo airfield back before the sky changed. After the sky changed, they bolted some towers onto it, poured a few square kilometers of new ferrocrete, and called it a relocation berth. You want to know what a relocation berth is? It's a place the galaxy parks its problems. See, when Earth got let into the big leagues, and I use let in loosely, the way a rich family lets in the gardener, we didn't get a seat at the table. We got the dishes. We were the new species, the backward ones, the ones who still got weepy at sunsets and buried our dead in the dirt like animals. The polished civilizations up there, the ones with names that sounded like wind chimes, they didn't want us at their parties. But they did want somewhere cheap to put the things they didn't want. So they gave us berths like Halden Reach, and they sent us there rejected. Not criminals, I want to be clear about that. Mostly the people who came through my line had done nothing wrong but exist at a bad time. Refugees, survivors. Species whose worlds had burned or flooded or simply been bought out from under them by something bigger. The galaxy is enormous and old, and it has a lot of ways of telling you don't belong. Halden Reach was where you ended up after you'd heard all of them. My job intake was simple on paper. Ships came down. I logged who was aboard, what condition they were in, and where the Conquered had decided they would be sent next. The Conquered, remember that word. The Conquered ran everything up there. Think of them like a council, except the council has soldiers, and the soldiers have very good manners and very bad eyes. Eyes that look at you and see a number. When a ship came in, the Conquered had usually already decided that ship's fate before it touched down. My job was just to read the verdict off a screen and pass it along. Accepted for resettlement, redirected, returned to origin. That last one, return to origin, sounds gentle, doesn't it? Sounds like sending a package back. Half the time, origin was a dead place, a world that didn't exist anymore. Returning someone to origin meant putting them back on a ship pointed at a grave and telling them to enjoy the trip. I read those words off a screen for 11 years. I told myself it wasn't my decision. I told myself I was just the messenger. You can tell yourself a lot of things, standing in a white room under bad light. Doesn't make them true, just makes them quiet. The day I want to tell you about started ugly and got worse, which, around there, meant it started normal. It was the season when the salt wind comes in low and mean, and it gets into everything, your coffee, your collar, the hinges of the big doors so they shriek when they open. I'd been on shift since before light. My boots were already gray with salt dust. I remember the coffee was bad because the coffee was always bad, and I remember thinking that morning that I'd give a week's pay just to sit somewhere green for an hour. Funny the things you remember, not the big stuff, the coffee. There were 3 of us on intake that morning. Me, and a kid named Tovi who was 19 and still believed the job meant something, and an old hand named Sefu who'd given up believing anything a long time ago and was better company for it. The board lit up around the 8th hour. 1 ship inbound, unscheduled. That right there made my neck itch. Unscheduled ships were never good news. Scheduled ships meant somebody up the chain had filled out the forms and made the arrangements. Unscheduled meant somebody had run. "What's the manifest?" I asked. Tovi squinted at the screen. It's blank." "Blank how?" "Blank like there's nothing there, species unlisted, count unlisted, origin," he frowned. "Origins redacted." Sefu came over, looked at the screen for a long moment, and then did something I'd only seen him do twice in 5 years. He set down his mug. "That's a flagged hull," he said quietly. "Flagged for what?" He didn't answer right away. He was reading the little string of code that ran along the bottom of the entry, the part most people never bother with, the part that's written in the Concord's own shorthand. His lips moved. Then he straightened up, and his face had gone careful, the way a man's face goes careful when he's decided not to say the thing he's thinking. "Bram," he said, "pull the welcome team back inside, all of them now." "What, why?" "Because that's not a relocation flag." He tapped the screen once with a knuckle. "That's a quarantine inheritance flag. That ship's been turned away, more than once." "Turned away from where?" Sefu looked at me, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, the old man looked tired all the way down to the bottom. "From everywhere," he said. I'd never seen a ship like the one that came down out of that salt-white sky. The relocation hulls we usually got were ugly but standard bricks with engines, the galaxy's idea of a moving van. This one was different. It was long and low and dark, and it had been beautiful once. You could see it in the bones of the thing, in the curve of the prow, the way someone had once cared about how it looked. But that was a long time ago. Now it was scarred, pitted. Whole sections of its skin were a different color than the rest, patched and repatched. The way you'd patch a coat you couldn't afford to replace and couldn't bear to throw away. It came down slow, too slow. One of its underthrusters was misfiring, coughing little stutters of light, and the whole ship listed maybe 3 degrees off true, like a man walking with a limp he's learned to hide but can't quite. It settled onto the pad with a groan that I felt in my chest. Steam, or something like steam, hissed out of seams that shouldn't have had seams. Then it just sat there. That's the part that got under my skin. Normally a ship lands, the ramp drops, people come stumbling out blinking at the sky. This one landed and went still. The salt wind keened against its hull. The bad coffee smell of my own breath fogged up the intake window, and the ship just sat, dark and patient and quiet, like it was deciding whether it had the strength to open at all. "How many aboard?" I asked. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. Tovi was working the scanner. "Reading's weird. It keeps changing, like the counts dropping while I watch." "Dropping?" "Yeah," he swallowed. "Bram, I think some of them are dying in there. I want you to understand something. I'd seen death come through that port. I'd seen ships full of the sick, the starved, the half-gone. You build a wall for it or it eats you. I had a good wall. 11 years of good wall. But there was something about that ship. Something about the way it had limped down out of the sky and then gone still. Something about a vessel that had been beautiful once, scarred all over now, sitting there too tired to open its own door. My wall had a crack in it before that ramp ever came down. I just didn't know it yet. It took 11 minutes for the ship to open. I know because I counted. 11 minutes of that thing sitting silent on the pad while the 3 of us watched, and Sefu murmured into the comm, calling up the chain, trying to find out what we were dealing with. Whoever he reached didn't give him much. I could tell from his face. Halfway through the call he stopped writing things down. When the ramp finally came, it didn't drop. It lowered. Slow and shaking, hydraulics whining like an old dog getting up off the floor. And out of the dark inside, the first of them came down into the light of our ugly little world. I'd seen a lot of species. You do in that job. You stop being surprised by shapes. But I'd never seen anything look so much like grief wearing a body. They were taller than us, but stooped, all of them, shoulders curled inward like they'd spent their whole lives ducking through doors built too low. Their skin was a deep slate gray, almost blue in the hollows, and it hung loose on them, the way skin hangs on the very old or the very hungry. They had long faces, long hands, eyes set deep and dark and enormous, eyes that didn't dart around the way frightened eyes do. These eyes just looked steady, heavy. Like they'd already seen the worst thing that was going to happen to them, and were just waiting to find out which day it landed on. The first one stopped at the bottom of the ramp. Behind it more came, a dozen, then 2 dozen, then more, a slow gray river of them, the strong half carrying the weak, the old leaning on the young. They moved like one thing, like a single body that had been cut into many pieces and was trying, gently, to hold itself together. And then I heard the sound. It came up out of them low, so low I felt it before I heard it, a deep resonant hum that seemed to come from their chests, from the bone, from somewhere under the bone. Many voices, all of them on the same note, rising and falling together. It wasn't words. It wasn't music exactly. It was the saddest sound I have ever heard in my life, and I have buried people I loved. Tovi made a small noise and put his hand over his mouth. "What is that?" I whispered. "What are they doing?" Sefu had gone very still beside me. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "They're mourning," he said. "That's a mourning song. They do it when." He stopped. "They do it constantly. That's the whole problem. That's why nobody wants them." I turned to look at him. "What do you mean that's why nobody wants them?" And Sefu told me about the Vehl. I'm going to tell it the way he told it to me, standing at that window, because I've never heard it told better, and because you need to understand it to understand the rest. The Vehl came from a world far out past the parts of the galaxy that get talked about at the nice tables. A water world mostly, with great slow tides and cities built on the backs of the tides, and they were old, older than the conquered, older than half the civilizations that now look down their noses at them. They had been once a people known for one thing above all others. They felt. That's it, that's the whole crime. The Vehl felt everything all the way down, and they couldn't hide it. When a Vehl is joyful, their whole body sings it. When a Vehl grieves, they grieve out loud, that low chest hum, and they can't stop it any more than you can stop your heart from beating. It isn't a choice. It's how they're built. Their feelings live on the outside of them, where everyone can see and hear and feel them. For a long time, this was no problem. On their own world, surrounded by their own kind, a people who all wore their hearts in the open built something beautiful, a civilization with no liars in it. Because you can't lie when your body broadcasts the truth, and no loneliness in it, because no grief ever went unheard. Then their world died. How it died doesn't matter for this story, and Sefu didn't say, and I didn't ask. Maybe a star, maybe the tides, maybe something the galaxy did and doesn't talk about at the nice tables. What matters is that it died, and the Vehl who survived took to their ships and went looking for somewhere to land. And the galaxy turned them away. Not with weapons. The civilized don't use weapons for things like this. They used forms. They used regulations. They used that smooth, smiling, terrible patience that powerful people use on the desperate. And underneath all the polite language, the reason was always the same. They couldn't stand the noise. A people who grieve out loud, who can't switch it off. Do you understand what that does to a tidy society? You can't put them in a city and have them mourn their dead world every single day where everyone can hear it. It's bad for morale. It's bad for business. It makes the comfortable uncomfortable, and there is no crime in the galaxy worse than making the comfortable uncomfortable. So world after world turned them away, quietly, politely. We sympathize, but our regulations, you understand, perhaps somewhere more suited to your particular needs. And the Vehl, who could not lie and could not hide what they felt, took every rejection the way you take a blow with your hands tied. They felt all of it. And then they got back on their ship and they sang their grief and they limped on to the next door, and the next, and the next. Until there were no more doors. Except, of course, the one nobody bothered to lock, the backwater, the dishwashers, the weepy primitives who still cried at sunsets. Us. They didn't come here because they chose Earth, Sefu said quietly, watching the gray river of them flow down the ramp. They came here because Earth is where the galaxy sends the things it's done saying no to. We're the last stop, Bram. We're not the destination. We're the dead letter office. I looked at those deep dark eyes, that stoop, that sound coming up out of their chests like the tide. So what's the verdict? I asked. What does the board say to do with them? Sefu didn't answer. I crossed to the screen myself. I pulled up the entry. And there it was, in the Concord's neat little letters, the verdict that had been decided before the ship ever touched our sky. Return to origin. Origin, a dead world. A grave with a date on it. Now, I told you my wall had a crack in it. Here's where it broke. I'd read those words 100 times. I'd read them and gone home and slept fine. Just the messenger, not my decision. But I'd never read them while 1,000 people sang their grief 20 meters from my window. I'd never read them while looking at a ship that had been beautiful once and was now nothing but scars held together by stubbornness. I'd never read them while a young one. There was a young one, near the front, small and gray and clinging to the leg of an older Vehl, turned its enormous dark eyes up toward our towers, toward the ugly salt-white nothing of Halden Reach, and looked at it. Looked at it like it might be home. That kid looked at the worst place on earth like it might be the first good thing it had seen in a year. And I had a screen in front of me that said, "Send them back to die." I stood there. The coffee went cold in my hand. Tovi was crying without making any noise, the way the young cry when they don't want you to see. Sefu was watching me, and I understood slowly that he'd called me over to that screen on purpose, that he'd seen something in me that morning, that he was waiting to find out what I was going to do, because whatever I did, he was going to do too. I want to tell you I had some grand thought, some speech in my head about justice and the worth of a soul. I didn't. The thought I actually had was small and stupid, and it's the truest thing I've ever felt. I thought not while I'm holding the pen. I put the cold coffee down. I reached over and I did the thing you are never, ever supposed to do at a relocation berth. The thing they tell you in training is the one unforgivable sin. I changed the verdict. I deleted return to origin, and in the field where the destination goes, I typed 3 words. Accepted, resettlement pending. And then I hit confirm, before my hands could think better of it. The system chimed, soft and pleasant, the way it chimes for anything. It didn't know it had just witnessed a crime. It didn't know I just bet my entire life on 3 words and a feeling. Sefu let out a long breath beside me. "Well," he said, "that's that then." "They'll know," I said. My voice was shaking. The second I changed it, somewhere a light went red. "They'll come." "Yeah," Sefu agreed. "They will." "How long do we have?" He looked out the window at the long, dark, scarred ship, at the gray river of mourners, at the small one with the enormous eyes. "Not long enough," he said. "You'd think changing 1 word on a screen would feel like nothing, a keystroke, a flicker. It felt like stepping off a roof. The thing about the Concorde is that they don't hurry, and that's what makes them frightening. A panicked enemy makes mistakes. The Concorde never panics because the Concorde has never, not once in its long, polished history, been in a hurry to do anything. They knew they'd win. They always knew they'd win, so they took their time. The red light I'd talked about, it didn't bring soldiers in the first hour, or the second. It brought a message. It came through on the official channel, the formal one, the one we almost never used. Tovi read it out loud because my hands weren't steady enough to scroll. It was very polite. It noted that an administrative irregularity had been detected at Halden Reach. It noted that the disposition of the vessel designated, and here it used a string of numbers, not a name, never a name, had been amended without authorization. It requested that the irregularity be corrected at the earliest convenience. It thanked us in advance for our cooperation. And at the bottom, in the same smooth tone, it noted that a Concorde vessel was being dispatched to oversee the correction, and would arrive in approximately 31 hours. 31 hours. That was the cruelty of it, you see. They didn't send soldiers screaming down out of the sky. They sent a polite letter and a clock. 31 hours for me to come to my senses. 31 hours for the fear to do their work for them. They were so sure that all they had to do was wait, and I'd fold and retype the verdict and put those people back on that ship myself, and apologize for the trouble. That's how it usually went. That's how it always went. I looked at that clock starting to run, and I thought about my apartment and my pension and the 11 clean years behind me, and how easy it would be, how reasonable, how forgivable to just press a few keys and make it all go away. And then the doors shrieked open behind us on their salt-stiff hinges, and the Vehl came in out of the wind. We weren't supposed to let them inside. Procedure was you process them on the pad in the cold, and you keep the building clean of them. But Sefu had already gone down and opened the inner doors, and Tovi had already started carrying out the thermal blankets we kept for emergencies. And by the time I got down to the floor, there were 200 Vehl filling up the intake hall, and the morning song was so loud in that enclosed space that the windows hummed with it. Up close they were worse and better. Worse because you could see how hurt they were. Their long gray hands were scarred. Many of them had wounds that hadn't healed right. They were thin in a way that scared me, the kind of thin where the body started eating itself. Up close I could see the children among them. And there were children more than I'd thought. Small gray shapes kept always at the center of the group, surrounded, protected. The way you protect the only thing you have left. Better because of how they touched each other. I have never before or since seen a people so gentle with their own. Every weak one had 2 strong ones beside it. Every frightened child had a dozen hands reaching to steady it. They moved through that cold, ugly hall like a single careful animal, and the song never stopped, and I realized after a while that it wasn't all grief. Underneath the grief there was something else, a thread of something I didn't have a word for yet. One of them came toward me. It was tall, even stooped, and old. I could tell it was old by the deep folds in its gray skin, and the way the others made room for it. It crossed the hall slowly and it stopped in front of me, and it looked at me with those huge dark eyes, and the song around us dropped, not silent, but quieter, the way a room goes quiet when something important is about to be said. It lifted one long scarred hand slow, so I wouldn't be afraid, and it pressed 2 fingers flat against the center of its own chest, where the sound came from. Then it reached out and pressed those same 2 fingers, very gently, against the center of mine. I felt the hum of it travel up its arm and into my chest, a vibration, their grief moving into me the way it moved between all of them. I didn't speak their language. There was no translator that worked on the Vehl. Sefu told me later. That was part of why nobody could ever resettle them. Nobody could even talk to them properly. But I understood that gesture the way you understand a thing in your bones before your brain catches up. It was saying, you heard us. After everywhere that hadn't. You heard us. I'm not a man who cries. I'd built a good wall, 11 years of good wall. But standing on that cold floor with an old alien's 2 fingers pressed against my chest, and its grief humming through me and its enormous eyes looking into mine, I felt the wall come down all at once, all 11 years of it, and I'm not ashamed to tell you I wept like the kid behind me. The old Vehl watched me cry, and then it did something I'll remember on the day I die. The note of the song shifted. Just slightly, just for a moment. The morning hum bent and rose, and for a few seconds 3, maybe 4, 200 grieving voices made a different sound entirely. A warmer sound. A sound with light in it. Sefu behind me breathed out a word like a prayer. That's, he stopped. Bram, I've read everything there is to read about these people, and there's almost nothing, but there's this one account, this one old account, about the other thing they do. The thing nobody's heard in 100 years because they've had nothing to do it about. What is it? I said. My voice was wrecked. It's the other song, Sefu said. The Vehl don't just grieve out loud. They do the opposite out loud too, he swallowed. That's gratitude, Bram. You're hearing gratitude. That's a sound the galaxy decided it didn't want to hear. So now you know what we were dealing with. 200 souls in the hall and more still coming down the ramp. A clock running down from 31 hours. a conquered vessel on its way to oversee the correction. A verdict I'd change that I had no authority to change, in defense of a people I couldn't even speak to, on the worst little patch of ground on Earth. And me, Bram from Intake, 11 clean years gone in a single keystroke, standing in the middle of it with an old alien's gratitude still humming in my chest, and absolutely no idea what I was going to do when the polite people with the bad eyes came down out of the sky to take them back. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest about that, because every time I tell this story somebody wants me to have been brave and clever from the start, and I wasn't. I was terrified. I'd done one true thing and I had no idea how to do the second. But I'll tell you what I did have. I had Sefu, who'd set his coffee down and opened the doors. I had Tovi, 19 and crying and already carrying blankets. I had a calm line in 31 hours and a question forming in the back of my head, small at first, then bigger. The question was this: how many other people on Earth would feel about that sound the way I did, if they ever got to hear it? Because here's the thing the conquered never understood about us. The thing the nice tables never figured out, in all their long, polished history. They thought our weakness was that we felt too much, that we cried at sunsets, that we were soft and weepy and primitive. They never once stopped to think about what a whole planet of people like that might do, if you set down 200 grieving strangers in front of them and let them hear it. They were about to find out. I picked up the comm. My hands had stopped shaking. I looked at Sefu and he looked at me, and the old man smiled for the first time in 5 years. "Who are you calling?" he asked. "Everyone," I said. I called everyone. Let me tell you how a man calls everyone with no authority, no plan, and a clock running down over his head. Badly, that's how. You do it badly and you hope. The first call I made was to a woman named Della Foss, who ran the supply depot at Marrow Junction, 40 minutes up the Salt Road. Della and I had a history, not the romantic kind, the better kind, the kind where you've each pulled the other out of a bad season and never made a thing of it. Della had a voice like a gravel road and a heart she pretended not to have. If anyone could move supplies fast and ask questions later, it was her. She picked up on the second ring. "Bram, it's not even noon, what's wrong?" I told her. Not all of it, there wasn't time for all of it. I told her there were 2,000 refugees on my pad, that they were starving, that the official channels had ordered them sent back to die, and that I'd refused. There was a silence on the line, a long one. The kind of silence where you can hear a person deciding what kind of person they're going to be. 2,000, Della said finally. "Give or take." "Bram, I don't have food for 2,000. "I know. I don't have blankets for 2,000. I don't have water purifiers. I don't have heaters. I don't have a tenth of what 2,000 people need to live through one cold night out there." "I know, Della." Another silence, shorter this time. "But you know who does," she said slowly. "Between all of us, you and me and everybody up and down this road who owes somebody a favor." That's when I knew it might work. Because Della Foss, who pretended not to have a heart, had already skipped past whether to help and gone straight to how. "Start a list," she said. "I'll start calling." And Bram, her voice changed, got rougher. "These soldiers that are coming, the polite ones, what happens when they get here and we've got 2,000 of them down on your pad and 100 of us standing in front of them?" I looked out the window at the gray river, still flowing down the ramp. "I don't know," I said. "I'm hoping it matters how many of us there are." "It always matters how many of us there are," Della said. "Make your calls." I'm going to skip ahead a little, because the next 12 hours were mostly phone calls, and they don't make good telling, even though they were the most important 12 hours of my life. Let me just give you the shape of it. It spread. That's the thing nobody up there ever understood about us, the thing I keep coming back to. It spread. I called Della, And Della called 11 people, and those 11 called who knows how many. And somewhere in the first few hours it stopped being a thing I was doing and started being a thing that was happening. A thing with its own weather. I'd light the spark, but the fire was the people's now. By the second hour, trucks were on the salt road. Della's first, loaded with everything her depot could spare, but then others behind it, headlights strung out along the dark flat like a line of slow stars coming in across the white. Farmers, truckers, a whole convoy from a relief co-op 2 towns over that had heard there was trouble and just came. People who'd never met a Vehl, never heard the word, didn't know the first thing about the politics of the nice tables up in the sky. They heard starving and sent back to die, and somebody said no, and they got in their trucks. By the 4th hour, there was a kid, I never got his name, I'm sorry to say, who'd driven 3 hours with a truck bed full of his family's winter wood and a generator his father used for the well. He backed it up to the intake doors and started unloading without a word to anyone. When I tried to thank him, he looked embarrassed and said, "My grandfather came over on a boat. Nobody wanted him either." And then he went back to unloading wood. That's it, that's the whole speech. Nobody wanted him either. I've heard senators talk for an hour and say less. By the 6th hour, we had heat in the intake hall and the 2 big hangars beside it. We had food, rough food, road food, whatever people had grabbed but food. We had water running through 3 purifiers Della had pulled out of a storehouse that wasn't strictly hers to pull from. We had doctors, 2 of them, real ones, who'd driven out when they heard, and who stood in the middle of all those gray bodies completely overwhelmed and completely determined, doing what doctors do, which is figure it out as they go. The Vehl didn't understand it. That's the part that breaks me still. They didn't understand why we were doing it. I watched the old one, the one who'd pressed its fingers to my chest, watch the trucks come in, watch the wood get unloaded, watch a human doctor kneel in the cold next to a sick Vehl child and check it over with hands that didn't know the right way to touch a Vehl but tried anyway, gently, the way you'd touch any sick child. And the old one's enormous dark eyes went from the doctor to the trucks to me and back, and there was something in its face I can only call disbelief. Because they'd been saying no to these people across the entire galaxy, world after world after world, polite no after polite no. The Vehl had crossed half of creation collecting nothing but the word no in every language there is. And here at the last stop, the dead letter office, the backwater nobody bothered to lock, here a kid was unloading his family's winter wood and saying nobody wanted my grandfather either. The morning song changed again that night. I noticed it around the 7th or 8th hour when I finally stopped to lean against a wall and breathe. The grief was still in it. The grief would always be in it, I think, the way salt's always in the sea. But woven through the grief now there was more and more of that other thread. The warm one. The one Sefu said the galaxy had decided it didn't want to hear. Gratitude. Rising up out of 2,000 chests in the cold, getting louder, getting braver, filling up those hangars until the metal walls hummed with it. I'd never heard anything like it. Neither had anyone else there. I watched grown men and women, truckers, farmers, hard people, stop in the middle of what they were doing just to stand and listen, and then go back to work with their faces wet, and not be embarrassed about it. Sefu found me against that wall around midnight. He had 2 cups of bad coffee. He handed me one. "You hear what's happening out on the road?" he asked. "What's happening on the road?" "More headlights." He took a sip, grimaced. The coffee really was terrible. "Word's gone past Marrow Junction now, past the relief co-op. It's on the feeds, Bram. Somebody filmed the song and put it up, and it's moving, fast. People are driving in from places I've never heard of." He looked at me. "By morning, there's going to be more humans at Halden Reach than there have ever been in the whole history of this miserable place." I should have felt good about that. Part of me did. But I was doing the math the way Sefu had taught me to, reading the string of code under the headline. "The conquered ship," I said. "When does the clock say?" Sefu's face went careful again. 9 hours. 9 hours, I repeated. They sped up, he said quietly. They were never going to wait the full 31, Bram. The polite letter, the long clock, that's for if you fold on your own. The second they saw the trucks on the road, the second it started spreading, they stopped being patient. He drank his coffee. Patient is for when they think they're going to win quietly. They don't think that anymore. I looked out at the headlights coming in across the salt, slow stars in the dark, more of them every hour. And up above them, somewhere past where the eye could reach, a ship coming down out of the deep with very good manners and very bad eyes. Then we'd better hope, I said, that a lot of stars come in before they do. They came in fast after that, the stars. Faster than the ship, thank God, faster than anything. I want to tell you about the morning, because the morning is when it became something I'll never be able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. I'd been awake for over a day. My eyes felt full of the salt dust. I went up to the high window in the control tower around dawn just to get a moment of quiet, and I looked out at Halden Reach, and I stopped breathing. The salt flats weren't white anymore. They were full of people. I don't know how to make you see it. The flats run out flat and empty for kilometers in every direction. That's the whole point of the place, the emptiness, the nowhere. And in the gray light of that dawn, the nowhere was gone. There were vehicles parked in their thousands, strung back along the salt road farther than I could see, headlights still burning here and there in the half-dark. And there were people. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands, maybe. I gave up counting. My eyes wouldn't hold the number. They'd come in the night, quiet, the way people come to a thing that matters, and they'd parked and gotten out and walked toward the only light for 100 kilometers, and they'd just stayed, standing in the cold, waiting. For what? They couldn't all help. There wasn't work for that many hands. They hadn't come to work. They'd come to be counted. That was Della's word when she found me at that window. She'd been up all night too. Her gravel voice was almost gone. She came and stood beside me and looked out at the sea of people she'd helped call up out of the dark, and she said, "They came to be counted, Bram. When the ship comes down, they want to be standing here when it does." Down on the floor, the Vehl had gone quiet. Not silent, they were never silent. But the song had dropped to almost nothing, that low foundation hum, because something was changing and they felt it before any of us said it. 2,000 of them, packed into the hangars and spilling out onto the warm parts of the pad, and they were watching the humans gather on the flats with those enormous dark eyes, and I swear to you they understood. Not the words, not the politics, but the shape of it. The shape of a great many strangers standing in the cold so that you would not be sent away alone. The old one came and found me when I came back down. It pressed its 2 fingers to its chest, and then to mine, the way it had before. But this time, when the grief hummed up its arm and into me, there was so much of the other thing mixed in, the warm thing, the gratitude, that I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. And I understood that maybe that's the truth of it. Maybe for the Vehl, after everything, grief and gratitude had become the same song. Maybe that's what it sounds like when a people who have lost everything finally find one thing they didn't lose. "They're coming," I told the old one. I don't know why it couldn't understand me, but you talk to people when it matters whether they can understand you or not. The ones who did this to you, they're coming to take you back, and there are a lot of us out there who aren't going to let them. I don't know if it'll work. I have to be honest with you, I don't know if it'll work. The old one looked at me, and then it did something it had never done. It reached up with one long gray hand and it touched my face, just rested its palm against my cheek, light as a leaf. And it made a sound just for me, just the 2 of us, a low private note I'd never heard in the song before. I didn't need a translator for that one either. It was saying, "It's enough that you tried." And then the sky split open, with the sound of the conquered coming down. You ever hear a sound so big it stops being a sound and becomes a pressure? A thing you feel in your sinuses, your fillings, the soft parts behind your eyes. That's how the conquered ship came in. It didn't roar. Roaring is for our machines, the crude ones, the ones that fight against the air. The conquered ship didn't fight against anything. It came down through the dawn sky on a column of pure silence so total it had weight, and the only sound was the world bending out of its way. It was vast. I'd thought the Vehl ship was big. This thing blotted out a quarter of the sky. It was perfect, that's the word that came to me, looking up at it, perfect, not a scar on it, not a patch, not a single sign that it had ever in its existence been hurt or hungry or afraid. Where the Vehl ship was all scars and stubbornness, this was all smoothness and certainty. It had never been turned away from anywhere. It had never had to be. It came to a stop maybe 200 meters up, directly over the pad, directly over the Vehl, and it hung there, silent and perfect, throwing its shadow down over all of us. And in that shadow, in the sudden gray cold of it, I watched 50,000 humans on the salt flats go very, very quiet. A voice came down out of the ship. It spoke our language perfectly. Of course it did. It spoke our language better than I do, in a voice that was warm and reasonable and kind, the kindest voice you ever heard, and that was the most frightening thing of all. It said it was here to correct an administrative error. It said it understood that emotions were running high, and that it sympathized, it used that word, sympathized, with the compassion that the people of Earth had shown. It said that compassion was a fine quality, a credit to our young species. But it said the disposition of the Vehl had been decided through proper process, by parties with proper authority, for reasons that were sound and considered. The Vehl could not be resettled. They had been evaluated many times by many worlds and found, and here the kind voice paused, delicately, the way you pause before saying a hard thing gently, found unsuitable. Their condition made integration impossible. It was, the voice said, a kindness to return them to a familiar place, rather than subject them to the distress of yet another failed resettlement. A kindness to send them back to a dead world, a kindness. The voice asked us, warmly, reasonably, to stand aside and allow the correction to proceed. It assured us that no one would be harmed. It thanked us in advance for our cooperation. And then it waited. That was its whole weapon, you understand, not the size of the ship, not whatever the ship could do, and I have no doubt it could do terrible things. Its weapon was that voice, reasonable, patient, so sure of itself that it didn't even raise itself to threaten. It had said no to 1,000 worlds in that exact voice. It had never once heard a different answer. It expected us to fold, the way everyone always folded, because what could 50,000 frightened primitives on a salt flat possibly do against a ship that blotted out the sky? Nobody moved. I held my breath. I think the whole world held its breath. The Vehl had gone silent, truly silent now. For the first time, the song stopped dead in 2,000 throats, because even they were waiting to see what we would do. And then, out on the flats, one person started walking forward. I couldn't see who, just a single figure small under that enormous shadow, walking out from the crowd toward the pad, toward the Vehl, putting themselves between the gray strangers and the perfect ship. And then another, and another, not running, not shouting, just walking, quiet and steady out of the crowd and toward the line until there were 10, and then 100, and then I lost count again because my eyes wouldn't hold it. Della was already moving. She'd left my side without a word. I saw her gravel-voiced and exhausted and absolutely unafraid, walking out onto that pad to stand with her back to the Vehl and her face to the sky. Tovi went past me, 19 years old, still believing the job meant something, and now I knew he'd been right the whole time and I'd been the fool. Sefu went, slow and stiff, the old man, setting himself down between the strangers and the ship like he was just finding a comfortable place to stand. And God help me, my legs were water. I went too. I walked out onto the pad. I turned my back on that perfect silent ship, which is the hardest thing I have ever physically made my body do, and I faced the Vehl, and I put myself between them and the sky. And all around me, more and more people did the same. A wall of human backs turned to the most powerful thing any of us had ever seen. A wall of human faces turned toward 2,000 people the galaxy had decided weren't worth keeping. The kind voice came again from the ship, a little less warm now, just a degree. It repeated that no one needed to be harmed. It asked us again to stand aside. And out on the flats, somewhere in that vast crowd, somebody started to sing. Not the Vehl. The Vehl were still silent, still watching, still waiting. It was a human. One voice out in the cold picking up the note. Just one at first, and it wasn't even a good voice. I want you to know that. It cracked on the high part, humming the low foundation note of the morning song. The note we'd all been hearing for a day and a night. The note that had filled the hangars and traveled out over the feeds and pulled 50,000 people across the dark to a place called Halden Reach. Then another voice picked it up. Then 10. Then the whole crowd, all of us, 50,000 humans on a salt flat under an alien sky, humming back to the Vehl the song the Vehl had sung to us. We didn't know what it meant. We couldn't have known. We were primitives, weepy, soft, the ones who cried at sunsets. We just knew the shape of the sound, and we gave it back to them, the way you give a frightened thing back its own heartbeat so it knows it isn't alone. I have tried for years to describe what happened to the Vehl when they heard it. The closest I've come is this. Imagine you have been screaming for help your entire life, in a voice that no one anywhere will answer, in a voice that everyone has told you is the very reason no one will answer. Imagine you have crossed the whole of creation, and at every door they have told you in kind voices that the sound you make is the problem with you, that if you could only stop making it, you might be welcome, that your grief is an inconvenience, and your gratitude is a noise, and the truest thing about you is the thing that makes you impossible to keep. And then imagine 50,000 strangers in the last place in the universe, hearing that sound and singing it back. The Vehl broke. The song came up out of them all at once, 2,000 voices, and it wasn't grief and it wasn't quite gratitude. It was something past both, something I don't have a word for, and I don't think there is a word for, not in any language at the nice tables or anywhere else. It rose up off that pad and met the human voices coming in from the flats, and the two songs braided together into one enormous sound. And that sound hit the underside of the perfect silent ship like a wave hits a wall. And the kind voice did not come again. I've thought 1,000 times about what happened in the next few minutes, and I still can't tell you exactly why the ship didn't simply do what ships like that can do. I've heard people say it was because we sang. That something in that braided sound moved even the conquered. I'd like to believe that. It's a beautiful thing to believe, and on my good days I let myself. But I was there, and I've had years to be honest, so I'll tell you what I actually think. I think they didn't fire because firing would have been a record. That's the cold truth of the nice tables, the thing under all the kind voices. The conquered never said no with weapons because weapons leave a mark. A burned pad, 50,000 dead primitives on a salt flat, a song recorded and already moving across the feeds of a whole young planet that ends in slaughter. They had spent their long polished history saying no in ways that left no marks, forms, regulations, that smooth patient certainty, precisely so that no one could ever point to a single moment and say there, that is what they are. And we had taken that away from them, by accident mostly, by being too many and too loud and too well filmed. We had made it so that whatever they did next would be the thing they were, forever, on the record, in front of everyone. So the perfect silent ship hung there in the dawn, throwing its shadow down over two intertwined songs, and it did the math that powerful things do, and it decided that 50,000 witnesses were a price it would not pay. The kind voice came one final time, and this time it had stopped being kind. It had gone flat. Procedural. The warmth peeled off it like paint, and underneath was the thing that had been there all along. It said that the people of Earth had chosen to obstruct a lawful correction. It said this would be noted. It said the matter would be referred to higher review, and that the consequences of our obstruction would be determined by parties with proper authority, and that we would be informed of the outcome in due course. In other words, we're not going to kill you in front of everyone. We're going back to the forms. We're going back to the long, quiet, patient way, and we will win that way the way we always have. And then the ship rose. Straight up, silent, perfect, no scar on it, and it folded the sky out of its way and it was gone, and the shadow lifted off the salt flats, and the cold dawn light came pouring back down over 50,000 people who had just discovered they were still alive. I'd like to tell you we cheered. We didn't. Not at first. There was just this enormous breath let out by a whole crowd at once, this great exhausted sound, and then a kind of laughter that's very close to crying, rolling out across the flats. Della grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. Tovi sat straight down on the cold ferrocrete and put his face in his hands. Sefu just looked up at the empty sky where the ship had been, and shook his head slowly, like a man who'd seen something he never expected to see and didn't quite trust his own eyes. The Vehl were still singing. They'd never stopped. That braided sound, that thing past grief and past gratitude, it just kept rolling, up off the pad and out over the crowd. And now that the ship was gone, there was nothing in it but the warm thread, the one the galaxy had decided it didn't want to hear, and it was the most beautiful sound that miserable place had ever held. I thought we'd won. That was my mistake, the same mistake I'd been making my whole career in a way. I thought the moment on the pad was the thing. I thought the standoff was the story. It wasn't. The standoff was easy. The standoff was one terrible, beautiful morning. The hard part, the real part, the part that took years, started the moment the ship was gone and somebody on the flats said, out loud, the simplest and most dangerous question there is. All right, they said, now what? Because here's what I'd done, if you strip away all the beautiful parts. I'd taken 2,000 starving, sick, traumatized people, people who couldn't speak any language we could understand, whose bodies broadcast their every feeling in a way no human society was built to handle, who had been told by the entire civilized galaxy that they were impossible to live among, and I'd bet their lives, and the standing of my entire planet, on 3 words and a feeling. And now the morning was over. The trucks would have to go home eventually. The 50,000 would have to go back to their lives. The doctors couldn't stay forever. The wood would burn down, and the Vehl would still be here on a salt flat in a place built to be nowhere, and the question wasn't how do we save them from the ship anymore. The question was, how do we actually let these people live? Not as a gesture, not for one heroic morning, for the rest of their lives and their children's lives here among us. I'll be honest with you. The Concord, in its cold, flat procedural voice, had not been entirely wrong about one thing. The Vehl were hard to live with. I learned that fast, once the glow of the standoff wore off. Not because they were unkind, I've never met a gentler people before or since. But because they felt everything, out loud, all the time, and they could not stop. And a human nervous system is not built to stand in a room with that for hour after hour, day after day. When a Vehl child was frightened, the whole settlement felt it in their chests. When a Vehl elder remembered the dead world, and they remembered it often, the way you can't help pressing a bruise, the grief rolled out over everything, and you'd be sitting at your dinner 2 kilometers away and suddenly find tears on your face for no reason you could name. It got into you. It wore on people. In those first months there were humans who'd signed up to help, good people, who had to leave because they couldn't carry that much feeling that wasn't even their own. The Concord had looked at exactly this and concluded, impossible, unsuitable, cannot be integrated, send them back. And I want to tell you about the thing we figured out that they never did in all their long polished history. Because this is the real HFY of it, if you want to call it that. Not the standoff, not the song. This. We didn't try to fix them. That's it, That's the whole secret. The galaxy had spent generations trying to figure out how to make the Veil quieter, how to dampen them, how to make their feelings bearable to societies that wanted comfort more than they wanted truth. And we, backward, weepy, primitive us, we never even tried. We didn't ask the Veil to feel less. We figured out how to feel more. Della was the one who said it first, months in, sitting exhausted in the half-built settlement we were raising out on the flats. She'd just come from sitting with an old Veil woman who was dying. They did still die, those first months. The damage from the long journey was too deep in some of them, and Della had sat with her through it, had let the grief roll into her chest and not run from it, had grieved a stranger she couldn't even speak to all the way down to the bottom. And she came out of that room wrung out and wrecked, and she sat down next to me and she said, "You know what they are, Bram, I finally figured it out." Her gravel voice was almost gone. "They're not too much feeling, that's not the problem with them. We just live our whole lives turned down so low we forgot the dial went higher." She wiped her face. "They turned mine up, that's all. It hurts, but I'd rather hurt at the right volume than be comfortable at the wrong one for the rest of my life. I've thought about that more than almost anything anyone's ever said to me. We didn't save the Veil. I want to be clear about that on the record after all these years. We didn't rescue them and teach them our better way. It was the other way around. They came to the last stop in the universe, the dead letter office, expecting one more no, and instead they spent the next years quietly, patiently, without ever meaning to, teaching a whole planet of people how to feel at the right volume. You want to know what the Veil gave Earth in the end? In exchange for a salt flat nobody wanted. They gave us back the dial. The conquered did come back. I told you the standoff was the easy part. They came back the way they'd promised through the forms. No ship blotting out the sky this time, just messages, reviews, findings. A long, slow, patient, bureaucratic siege conducted in kind voices, designed to grind us down over years the way water grinds down stone. They referred the matter to higher review. The higher review found that Earth had acted improperly. There were sanctions, quiet ones, trade things, status things, the kind of punishments the powerful use that never look like punishments. Earth got pushed even further down the table than it already was, and there were people, important people, on our own side who said it wasn't worth it, who said 2,000 strangers weren't worth the price the whole planet was paying, who wanted, in their own kind reasonable voices, to hand the Veil back and apologize for the trouble and get our seat at the table back. I won't pretend that fight was clean or that we won it easily. We nearly lost it more than once. There were years where the Veil's whole future hung on votes in rooms I'll never see, decided by people who'd never stood on that salt flat and heard the song. But here's the thing the conquered never could account for, the variable that wasn't in their long, polished math. The song had gotten out. That recording from the first night, the one somebody filmed and put up, the one that pulled 50,000 people across the dark, it never stopped moving. By the time the conquered slow siege really got going, there wasn't a person on Earth who hadn't heard the Veil sing. And you cannot, it turns out, hand a people back to die once your whole planet has heard them be grateful to be alive. The kind, reasonable voices that wanted to give them up, they kept running into the same wall, the same simple thing, 50,000 times over and then millions of times over. We heard them, you can't make us unhear them. That was the wall, that was the whole wall, and it held, not because we were strong, because we were the kind of soft that doesn't bend back. The conquered had built its entire power on the bet that no one would ever pay a real price to keep a stranger. They'd been right for a very long time, across a very large galaxy. They just never run into a species dumb enough, and stubborn enough, and soft enough, to lose its seat at the table over 2,000 people it couldn't even talk to. We paid the price for years, and we kept the Veil. I want to take you forward now to the end, because the middle is just years, and years don't narrate well, even good ones. And these were, in the main, good ones. The settlement out on the salt flats isn't a settlement anymore. It's a town. A real one with a name. The Vehl named it in their own way with a sound, and the closest we can come to saying it in our mouths is a word that means, roughly, the place the song was answered. We just call it answer mostly. People say they're driving out to answer. There are humans who were born there now, who grew up with the song in their chests their whole lives, and you can pick them out anywhere. They're the ones who feel things all the way down and aren't ashamed of it. The ones who cry at the right times and laugh at the right times and never, ever turn the dial down to be comfortable. The Vehl children grew up. Some of them are grown now, with children of their own, gray and tall and stooped a little less than their parents, because they grew up in a place where they never once had to duck through a door built too low. They still sing. They'll always sing. But you should hear what's in the song now. There's so much joy in it some days that you have to stop what you're doing and just stand there and take it, the way you'd stand in the first warm day of spring. The old one, the one who pressed its fingers to my chest, the one who touched my face on that first terrible morning and told me it was enough that I'd tried, the old one lived a long time. Longer than the doctors thought it would. It became something like the heart of the whole town, the one all the others gathered around. We never could speak each other's languages, not really, not in all those years. We never needed to. I'd go out to answer when the job got heavy, and I'd find the old one and we'd sit together and it would press its fingers to my chest, and we'd just be, for a while, at the right volume. It died on a spring morning full of years, surrounded by more people who loved it than most beings in this universe will ever be surrounded by. The whole town sang it out. I was there. The grief in that song went all the way down to the bottom of the world, and so did the gratitude, and I couldn't have told you, standing there with tears pouring down my face, where the one ended and the other began. That's the thing the Vehl taught me in the end, that I'll carry to my own spring morning. Grief and gratitude aren't opposites. They're the same song, sung by people who had something worth losing. The conquered never knew that. The nice tables, in all their long, polished history, never figured it out. They'd built a whole civilization on the idea that the feeling was the problem, that if you could just get the grief down low enough, quiet enough, comfortable enough, you'd be safe. And they were safe. They were perfectly, beautifully, silently safe on a ship without a single scar. And they were the loneliest things I ever saw in my life. I never went back to intake. You probably guessed that. I quit the day after the standoff, before they could fire me, which they were certainly going to do. I'd committed the one unforgivable sin. I'd changed the verdict. There's no coming back from that in that line of work, and I didn't want to come back. I was done reading other people's fates off a screen and telling myself I was just the messenger. Sephu quit too. Old as he was, stubborn as he was, he came out to answer with me and spent his last years there, and he was happier than I'd ever known him, the man who'd given up believing anything, finally finding 2,000 people worth believing in. Tovi, 19, still believing the job meant something. Tovi was right all along, and he never let me forget it in the gentlest way for the rest of his life. He runs things out at Answer now, the intake of all things. He's the one who meets the new ships when they come down. Because they do come down now. That's the part I love best to tell. Word got out, you see, not just on Earth, out there, past the nice tables, in all the dark, cheap corners of the galaxy where the rejected end up, where the unsuitable and the impossible and the ones who feel too much get sent. Word got out that there was a place, way out at the last stop, the backwater, the dead letter office, where they'd heard the Vehl sing and answered. And the ships started coming, not just Vehl, all of them, every people the galaxy had decided it couldn't stand to keep. The too loud, the too strange, the too much. They limped down out of the sky at Halden Reach, scarred and patched and stubborn, expecting one more no. And Tovi meets them at the bottom of the ramp, and he presses his fingers to his chest, the way the old one taught us all to do. And he says, in 100 languages now, we've learned a few. He says the only thing that ever mattered, the thing 50,000 of us hummed into the cold on the first morning, the thing the whole galaxy had decided it didn't want to hear. We hear you. So that's it. That's the story told right for once. People ask me what the worst job on Earth is, and I tell them, being the man who tells someone they have nowhere left to go. I did it for 11 years, and then a ship full of dying strangers, a people the whole galaxy couldn't stand to keep, taught me that there's no such thing, that there is no such place as nowhere, not really, not unless we decide to build it and call it a relocation berth and tell ourselves we're just the messengers. The galaxy thought our weakness was that we felt too much. They were right that we feel too much. They were just wrong about which one of us that made weak. We're the backward ones, the weepy primitives, the ones who still cry at sunsets, who bury our dead in the dirt, who turned the dial up instead of down and lost our comfortable seat at the comfortable table over 2,000 strangers we couldn't even talk to. And out at the last stop in the universe, in a town called Answer, the rejected of the whole galaxy come down out of the sky every season now, expecting the word no. And they don't get it. Not here. Never again here. That's the worst job on Earth, the one I quit. And meeting those ships at the bottom of the ramp and telling them we hear you. That's the best one. I should know. I built it.